Hello everyone, this is Raji here, your botany teacher. Welcome to online session of Next Gen Doctors Academy. So today I will be discussing with you a very important chapter for our competitive exam, that is respiration in plants, right? So respiration in plants is included, as you know, in plant physiology part of the concept. Now plant physiology has a good weightage when we talk about the NEET examination. So we have 3 chapters. So one of the important chapter here is respiration in plants, right? So we'll begin with what are the important concept that we are going to discuss today and how we need to approach the topic and how and what type of questions will be included in your examination. So let us first start with the basic, definitions which are included or which will help us to proceed through this chapter. So here, respiration in plants, right? So first we will see what exactly do we mean by respiration, right? So now respiration, breathing, combustion, all these terms are similar to here and somewhat similar in the process also, right? So first we will see what are the basic difference between all these terms, and we know that respiration is one of the important feature or one of the important metabolic process in all living organism, right? And this is the process that help the organism to derive the energy that is required for performing various function in them. So when we talk about respiration, the term respiration here simply means breakdown of food, right? So, or breakdown of complex molecules, right? So, breakdown of food or breakdown of complex molecule to release energy, right? Now, it is a process by which complex molecules are converted into simple molecules. So, what is happening here? The food or the complex molecules that are present in an organism, it is converted to simple molecules. So, in respiration, what happens is the complex molecule. So when I say complex molecule, it is macromolecules which is having a higher molecular weight, that is our food, right? For example, carbohydrate. So complex molecules will be converted into or broken down into simple molecule. As a process, lot of energy is released, right? And this energy is used to form ATP. So here ADP will react with a phosphate and ultimately it will help in the release of ATP. Always remember, during respiration, right, the ATP formation is not direct process. Whatever energy is released here, energy can be trapped and it can be converted into ATP, right? And this ATP is used to perform different function, right? As we know that ATP is called as the energy currency of the cell, right? And whatever functions or whatever metabolic process, when we talk about growth, reproduction, regeneration, everything requires energy, right? And this energy is given in the form of ATP. Now, this ATP can be generated through the breaking down of complex molecule into simple molecule. So this is exactly what we mean by respiration, right? Now, when we talk about respiration, a very close term that is associated with respiration is breathing, right? So many a times, many kids, they confuse between respiration and breathing, right? So when we talk about breathing here, as we know that it is simple exchange of gases. So no energy is produced during breathing. It is just exchange of gases, right? Now, since we are talking about respiration in plant, right? So we know that plant, unlike animals, doesn't have a complex set of organ or organ system for their breathing. right? So they have simple pores that you call as stomata for exchange of gases. So when we talk about breathing in plants, right? So breathing in plants is because of a very specialized pore that we call as stomata, right? So we have studied about stomata in lower classes also. Now when we talk about stomata, all of us know that they are small openings that are present on the surface of the leaf, and the function of this opening, the main function of this opening is exchange of gases. Other than exchange of gases, it also helps in the process of transpiration, that is release of excess water in the form of water vapor. Now when we talk about exchange of gases here, right, if you look at stomata here, right, so exchange of gases, right, so release of oxygen and intake of carbon dioxide, this process will be very important, that is happening during photosynthesis, right? At the same time, when we talk about respiration, right? So for respiration, what is required is oxygen. So this is another way of intake and the release of gases, right? So both way the gases release will happen. So the second case here is for respiration, right? So as we can see here, for respiration, what is important here is oxygen, because oxygen is the one which helps in the process of respiration, right? So based on presence or absence of oxygen, we have different types of respiratory process, right? So now let us see here. A third similar process that we are going to study here is combustion, right? So what we are doing here, we are just exploring the different types of terms that are correlated with respiration, right? So when we talk about combustion here, combustion also is burning or breakdown of complex molecule, right? So simply when we talk about combustion, combustion is said to be burning, right? So combustion is a spontaneous process, right? So it's a spontaneous process. So what happens during this spontaneous process? In this process also, complex molecule is converted into simple molecule. Then why can't we say it is respiration, right? The reason being, when this complex to simple molecule is converted, lot of energy is produced, but this energy cannot be trapped, right? So you cannot trap this energy. Because you cannot trap this energy, no ATP can be produced as a result of combustion, right? So the primary difference between respiration and combustion, although both is breakdown of complex molecule into simple molecule, both releases energy. Respiratory energy can be trapped and can be used to form ATP, whereas the combustion energy that is released, it cannot be trapped and it cannot be formed into ATP. The reason being, because it is a very fast process, right? So that means we can say that safely that respiration is a very slow step-by-step process which actually is required for the survival of all living organisms, because it is the process that helps to release lot of energy. So these are few of the basic terms that are important with respect and that go hand in hand when we talk about respiration. So respiration is a metabolic process, whereas when we talk about breathing, breathing is a physical process. So that is the major difference between respiration and breathing. One is a metabolic enzymatic process, whereas breathing, when we talk about, it is a physical process which doesn't involve any kind of enzyme, which doesn't involve any kind of metabolism and all, right? It is simply physical exchange of gases, right? So now let us talk about few important parameters with respect to respiration, right? So now when I say respiration, there are few terms that we should be aware with only with respect to this particular process. The first, it is a biochemical process, right? So now the word, when we talk about biochemical, why we are using the term a biochemical process? Because it is happening inside a living organism. That is the reason we are calling it as a biochemical process, right? So it's a biochemical process, right? It is, when we talk about the way whether it is oxidation or reduction, you can also say it is a redox process. When I say it is a redox process, it contains both oxidation as well as reduction reaction, right? Now, it is an exergonic process, right? When we say exergonic, it helps in the release of energy, whereas photosynthesis is an endergonic process. For making food, you need to provide energy. Here, you are breaking food. That is the reason energy is released. So, these three terms are very important when we talk about respiration. It's a biochemical process. When we say it is a biochemical process, you mean biocatalysts are involved, right? So, what do you mean by biocatalyst? Biocatalyst means enzyme. So, it is an enzyme mediated process, right? It is a redox process because it has both reduction and oxidation reaction, and it is an exergonic process because a lot of energy is released, and it is that energy that we are using to form ATP, right? So, these are a few of the important terms associated with respiration, right? So, now as I was telling you, respiration for implants, respiration doesn't involve any complex set of organs and organ system, right? So, what is important here for respiration is just an opening that helps in letting of air for the process of respiration. So, that is what we call as stomata and all. Now, here when we say the process or the associated process that is associated with respiration in plants, as I said, the complex set of organs are not there. The plant or any multicellular organism, when we talk about, in them the type of respiration is known as cellular respiration, right? So, when I say I am respiring or a plant is respiring, that doesn't mean me as an individual is undergoing respiration or a plant as an individual is undergoing respiration, because human, animal, plant and all, they are multicellular organism. So, when we take example of a plant, plants are made up of millions of cells, right? So, each and every cell of the plant should undergo the process of respiration. It is not the whole plant is undergoing respiration as such, right? That is the reason every cell of a plant, when it undergoes respiration, that process is called as cellular respiration, right? So, respiration in multicellular organism is also known as cellular respiration. Now, why cellular respiration? Each cell is performing respiration, right? So, the process is performed by individual cells. That is the reason it is known as cellular respiration, right? Now, another term that will come handy for this chapter is respiratory substrate. So, another term that is highlighted in the textbook, right, and which is important from exam point of view is what we call as respiratory substrate, right? So, substrate or molecules, right, that are undergoing respiration or used in the respiration process is known as respiratory substrate, right? When we talk about respiratory substrate, the substrate that can be used for respiration, right? It can be carbohydrate, right? It can be fats or it can be proteins, right? So, these are the three respiratory substrates that are generally used or can be used for respiration, right? So, although all the three substrates can be used for respiration, carbohydrate is said to be the most preferred substrate for respiration. So, in the plant, if all the three biomolecules are available, which one will be preferred by the plant cell? Definitely it is carbohydrate. Why the carbohydrate is most preferred substrate? Because it is slow burning substrate. When I say slow burning means the breakdown of carbohydrate or complex carbohydrate, it is a very slow process. So unless and until the process is slow, involving a different step of reaction, the energy that is released during the process will not be able to trap it and convert it into energy. When we talk about fats here, right, fats burns faster, right? So compared to carbohydrate and protein, right, the burning of fats is comparatively fast. When I say it burns faster, although it provides 2.25 times more energy, right? Although it provides more energy compared to its counterpart like carbohydrate, yet we don't, or the plants doesn't prefer fats as their preferred respiratory substrate, because the process when the fat burns, it is a very spontaneous and fast process, and all those energy cannot be converted to ATP, right? So whether it is carbohydrate, fats or protein, all these, as you might be knowing, they are complex biomolecule, right? So when we talk about respiration, as I told you before in the introduction itself, the complex molecule has to be converted into simple one. So it is first converted into simple one, and that it is further undergoing the process of respiration. So this is what you mean by the term cellular respiration and the term respiratory substrate, right? So now comes, how do plants breathe, right? Because for respiration, when we talk about, one of the primary requirement for respiration is exchange of gases, right? So that is what we mean by breathing, right? So as I discussed before also, when we talk about breathing in plants, right, definitely there is only one of the part or one adaptation that is seen in plant which helps in exchange of gases is stomata. So stomata is present in every type of plants. The number of stomata depends on what kind of plants we are talking about. Like for example, if we are talking about dicot will have a stomata only on the lower surface, right? And when we talk about monocot plants, monocot will have stomata on both upper as well as lower surface. Now, where do we see stomata? Stomata is mainly seen on leaves, right? So when we talk about leaf here, we know that suppose if this is a dicot leaf, leaf is made up of these complex tissues, right? So now here, this complex tissues, right? So the upper part of the leaf, right, or upper surface of the leaf, when we talk about, they will have this opening, right? And this is the opening that helps in exchange of gases, what you call as stomata, right? So now if it is a monocot leaf, the stomata will be present on both upper and lower surface. Now the stomata in monocot is of dumbbell shape. The guard cell particularly, it is of dumbbell shape, right? So this helps in exchange of gases, right? So gases, oxygen will be, going inside and it reaches the cell, and inside the cell, what will be happening is respiration. That is breaking down of the compound, complex compound into simple compound, right? So that is about, in general, about breathing. We don't need to go in detail how the breathing happens. We should, because this is already covered in our chapter of anatomy of flowering plants, right? So here, for this chapter, we should be aware that what part of the plant is responsible for breathing or typically exchange of gases, right? So now let us talk about the process of respiration. Now before we go into the process of respiration, we will just see what are the different types of respiration that can be seen in different plants, right? Now we will talk about types of respiration. So basically, when we talk about types of respiration, we know that there are two basic main type of respiration, that is aerobic and anaerobic, right? So we have two types of respiration here. We have aerobic respiration and we have anaerobic respiration, right? So when we talk about aerobic and anaerobic respiration, aerobic respiration, we all know that it happens in the presence of oxygen, right? And anaerobic respiration occurs in absence of oxygen, right? When I say absence of oxygen, there can be a complete absence or it can be a partial absence, right? So absence of oxygen can be complete, right? So complete absence or partial absence, right? So when we talk about complete absence of oxygen, example is ethanol fermentation, right? Partial absence of oxygen when we talk about, right? It is lactic acid fermentation, right? Remember, I am using the word fermentation here, right? Now, under the heading of anaerobic respiration, I am using the word fermentation. Fermentation is a type of anaerobic respiration. So, that is the reason we are using the word fermentation under anaerobic respiration. But there is a basic difference here. When we talk about fermentation here, fermentation particularly refers to an extracellular process, right? Why extracellular process? Because whatever enzyme is released, enzymes are released outside. That is the reason it is known as extracellular process, right? Whereas when I use the word for, respiration is said to be an intracellular process, right? So in the textbook, we have two types of fermentation. We have ethanol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. Now, when we say ethanol fermentation, what example we can give for ethanol fermentation? So, for ethanol fermentation, we can give the example of yeast. So, ethanol fermentation occurs in yeast, right? Whereas lactic acid fermentation, you can give the example of lactic acid bacteria and the muscle cells, right? So these are the example that we can give for lactic acid fermentation, right? So now in the presence of oxygen, when we talk about, right? So aerobic respiration in the presence of oxygen. So what will happen during aerobic respiration? Here your complete food or complex molecule, it is completely converted, right? So when we talk about aerobic respiration, your food, what is the most preferred substrate? As I already told you, carbohydrate is the most preferred substrate. Now the breakdown product of carbohydrate is ultimately glucose. So now this glucose is completely converted. So in the presence of oxygen. Why presence of oxygen? Because we are talking about aerobic respiration. That is the reason it will happen in the presence of oxygen. So your glucose will be converted into carbon dioxide, water, and as a result, lot of energy will be released, right? So here when we talk about respiration, your glucose in the presence of oxygen will be completely broken down into carbon dioxide, water, and energy, right? This energy is roughly about 686 kilocalories, right? See here, I haven't written the word ATP here. What I am saying here, lot of energy is released. Now this energy, what is released here, is used to form ATP. So ATP is also formed in our body. So to form ATP also we require energy, or the plant require energy. So where is that energy coming from? The energy is coming from the breakdown of food. Always remember, aerobic respiration will give you maximum energy compared to anaerobic respiration. So these are the two types of respiration based on whether it is happening in the presence of oxygen or in the absence of oxygen. So when it happens in the presence of oxygen, you call it as aerobic. When it occurs in the absence of oxygen, you call it as anaerobic. Simple, we need to remember. When we talk about glucose here, glucose contains how many carbon? It contains your 6 carbon, right? Now all the 6 carbon has to be broken down, or You know, when we talk about energy released from the food, so where is the energy present in the food? So energy is present in these bonds, right? So if we have to extract all the energy from the food, all these bonds need to be broken down. That means during respiration, what is happening here? All these bonds, what bond here I am talking about? All the carbon-carbon bonds that you can see here, it has to be broken down. So after breaking down, what will happen? Once the bonds are broken down, each carbon is released in the form of carbon dioxide. See, that is the reason when you break down carbohydrate, how many carbon dioxide you are ultimately getting? You are getting 6 carbon dioxide, right? So this is your complete breakdown of food. So when we talk about this process, this is known as complete breakdown, right? So what is the complete breakdown product? Complete breakdown product is carbon dioxide. When we talk about the product of complete breakdown, the product is carbon dioxide and water, right? When we talk about these two process, that is ethanol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation, you call it as partial breakdown. So fermentation, when we talk about, it is a type of partial breakdown of complex compound, because here what we are getting? We are getting ethanol, right? So ethanol, still we have C2H5OH. That means still we have some bonds in them which is not being completely broken, right? As well as lactic acid. Lactic acid still is having bonds. That is the reason we cannot call it as a complete breakdown. Unless and until it is completely broken down, all the energy that is stored in the molecule cannot be extracted. So this is a partial breakdown of glucose. This is a complete breakdown of glucose, right? So now each of the process we will go individually, separately, in detail, right? So when we talk about here aerobic respiration, right? So for today, just we will see what are the different steps that are there for aerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration is completed in 4 steps in living organism, whether it is plant, whether it is bacteria, or whether it is animal. Now many of you has a confusion that bacteria are always anaerobic, or this process doesn't happen in bacteria. No, bacteria can undergo both aerobic as well as anaerobic respiration, based on what kind of species are we talking about, right? So when we talk about aerobic respiration, what are the different steps we need to study about it? The first step is glycolysis. Each of the steps are important. Glycolysis, or we also call it as EMP pathway. The second process here is link reaction. The third process is what you call as TCA cycle, or you can also call it as Krebs cycle, right? And the final step here is electron transport system, right? Now remember, although it is a 4-step process, right? The first 3 steps is the breakdown step. So your food is broken down by the end of Krebs cycle. So what is the use of electron transport system? Electron transport system is the step which will derive the energy and convert to ATP, right? So this is what happens in the cell of aerobic organism, right? At the same time, when we talk about anaerobic respiration, right? Few things we need to consider here, right? The energy that is released is very less, right? And it is a partial breakdown, right? So complex molecule is not completely converted into simple molecule, right? So that is all about our today's class, right? Thanks.